there's something people don't tell you about living in Australia. From the outside, it looks like the perfect life. Good income, clean cities, a lifestyle most people dream about. But once you're actually there, the story starts to change. You realize that earning money doesn't always mean you're getting ahead. Rent takes a huge portion of your income. Groceries feel more expensive than you expected. And somehow, at the end of the month, there's not much left. You start asking yourself simple questions. Why does it feel this hard? Am I doing something wrong? But then you look around, and you realize it's not just you. Students are struggling. Working professionals are cutting back on expenses. Even people with stable jobs are starting to feel financially stuck. And that's when it hits you. Maybe the problem isn't the person. Maybe the system itself is becoming harder to live in. And in 2026, this isn't just a few people feeling it. It's becoming the reality for thousands. So what's really going on? Why are people moving to Australia with big expectations, but facing a completely different reality? Why are students finding it harder to survive even with part-time jobs? Why are skilled professionals struggling to save money? And if things are already this challenging, what will the next few years look like? Is this just temporary? Or is Australia slowly becoming a place where living comfortably is no longer easy? If you're planning to move, already living there, or just trying to understand the real situation, this is something you need to see clearly. Because this isn't about negativity, it's about reality. On this channel, I break down real-world situations using research, data, and practical insights, so you can make informed decisions, not emotional ones. If you value honest, no-hype content like this, consider subscribing, because understanding the truth early can save you a lot later. And in this video, we're going deep into 10 brutal truths about why living in Australia is becoming increasingly difficult in 2026. Let's start with something almost everyone experiences first: housing. Right now, in cities like Sydney and Melbourne, rent isn't just expensive, it's overwhelming. A basic one-bedroom apartment can easily cost over $2,000 to $2,500 per month, depending on the area. And that's not luxury, that's just a normal place to live. Now think about this. Even if someone earns a decent salary, a huge portion of that income disappears just on rent, before food, before transportation, before anything else. And that's where the pressure begins. Because when housing takes that much of your income, everything else starts to feel tight. You begin to think twice before spending. You delay plans. You cut back on things you once enjoyed. And for students or newcomers, the situation feels even more intense. Many arrive expecting to settle within a few months. But what they face instead is a highly competitive rental market, limited availability, dozens of applicants for a single place, and rising prices that don't seem to slow down. So even finding a place becomes stressful. And when you finally do, it often costs more than you planned. According to housing reports and rental trends, demand continues to outpace supply in major cities, which means this isn't just a short-term issue. It's an ongoing problem. And that leads to a bigger question. If housing alone is this expensive, how do people manage everything else? And that brings us to the second pressure point: daily expenses. Not long ago, basic living costs in Australia felt manageable. But now, people are starting to notice the difference. Groceries, transport, utilities, everything feels more expensive than before. You walk into a supermarket, pick up the same items you always do, and still end up paying noticeably more. It's not just inflation as a concept, it's a daily experience. Standing at the checkout and thinking, was it always this expensive? For families, this hits even harder, because groceries aren't optional. You can delay buying things, but you can't stop eating. Reports from economic data and cost of living trends show that prices have steadily increased over recent years. And when you combine that with rising rent, a large part of your income is already committed, not to growth, not to savings, just to maintaining your lifestyle. And that creates a feeling many people don't expect, a feeling of being stuck. But here, where it gets even more frustrating, because while expenses are rising, income isn't increasing at the same pace. Many people assume that in a developed country like Australia, salaries naturally adjust with living costs. But in reality, Wage growth has been much slower compared to how quickly expenses have increased. Yes, people are earning, but their purchasing power, that's where the real impact is. You might get a raise, but if rent increases more than that, if groceries cost more than last year, that raise doesn't feel like progress. It feels like you're just trying to keep up. And over time, that creates a quiet, constant pressure. You work more, you try to manage better, you push yourself harder, but somehow, it still doesn't feel enough. And this is where many people start questioning things internally. Not loudly, but quietly. Is this really worth it? And once that question starts to sit in your mind, it doesn't go away easily. Because it's not just about numbers anymore. It's about how your life feels day to day. You wake up, go to work, stay busy, do everything you're supposed to do. But at the end of the month, there's still that feeling that you're not really moving forward. And for many people, this becomes even more frustrating when they look at their qualifications. They've studied, they've gained experience, they've made the move expecting growth. But the reality of the job market doesn't always match those expectations. Australia has strong opportunities, no doubt, but it also has a system where local experience matters a lot. So even skilled professionals often find themselves starting from lower positions, sometimes taking jobs that don't match their background, sometimes waiting months just to get the opportunity they expected much earlier. And during that time, the expenses don't wait. Rent is still due, bills still come, groceries still cost what they cost, and that gap between expectation and reality starts to grow. Now here, where it gets even more challenging. Thousands of international students move to Australia every year with the hope of building a better future. And on paper it makes sense. Study, work part-time, gain experience, then grow. But in reality, balancing studies and expenses is not easy. Part-time income often isn't enough to fully cover living costs. So students start cutting back, sharing rooms, working longer hours, sacrificing comfort just to stay afloat. And over time, that creates pressure, not just financially, but mentally. Because when you're constantly thinking about money, survival, and stability, it affects how you experience everything else. Now combine that with another layer that many people underestimate: hidden costs. It's not just rent and groceries. It's transportation, fuel, insurance, phone bills, internet. Individually, they don't seem overwhelming, but together, they quietly increase your monthly spending. And before you realize it, a large portion of your income is already allocated, not by choice, but by necessity. Which brings us to something even bigger: the cost of maintaining a certain lifestyle. Australia offers a high standard of living, clean environment, good infrastructure, safe cities, but that standard comes at a price. Everything is designed to be high quality, and that naturally makes it expensive. So even basic living feels premium. And for many people, this creates a constant balancing act, trying to enjoy life while also managing rising expenses. And from what I've personally observed through research and real experiences shared by people living there, Australia isn't necessarily getting worse as a country. It's becoming more demanding, more expensive to maintain the same lifestyle, more competitive to achieve stability. That doesn't mean opportunities don't exist. They do, but they require more patience now, more planning, more realistic expectations. And this is where I think many people make a mistake. They compare Australia based on old information, stories from years ago, experiences that were true at the time, but don't fully reflect the current situation. Because in 2026, things have shifted, not dramatically overnight, but gradually over time. And unless you update your understanding, the reality can feel overwhelming. Now this leads to another important factor: healthcare and living security. Australia has a good healthcare system, but for international students and temporary residents, access isn't always straightforward. Insurance becomes necessary, and that adds another cost layer. Again, not massive on its own, but combined with everything else, it adds pressure. And when you take a step back and look at the full picture, you start to understand why people are feeling this shift. It's not just one big problem. It's multiple small and medium pressures building together. And over time, that changes how people experience life. Before we move into the final part, where we talk about what this means long-term and why some people are starting to rethink their plans. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who values understanding reality before making decisions. And that's exactly what this channel is about. So if you haven't already, consider subscribing, because content like this isn't about hype. It's about clarity, and clarity is what helps you move smarter. And when you look at everything together, a clear pattern starts to form. This isn't about one major problem. It's about multiple pressures building at the same time. Housing is expensive. Daily expenses are rising. Income isn't keeping up. Opportunities feel more competitive. And when all of this combines, life doesn't necessarily collapse, but it becomes heavier, more calculated, more uncertain, more demanding. Now, before going further, if you find this kind of honest, research-based content helpful, take a moment to subscribe and explore the channel. I regularly break down real-life situations like this so you can make smarter decisions, not rushed ones. Because at the end of the day, Australia is still a strong country. It still offers opportunities, but in 2026, it's no longer an easy place to build a life. It requires more planning, more awareness, and more realistic expectations. For some, that challenge becomes motivation. For others, it becomes a reason to reconsider. And maybe that's the real truth here.